Hello, 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 and welcome to episode number 35 of Endless Conversation Loop. I am Brandon, and the person that I'm talking to today is my ever amazing co-host.
Hello, this is Boom.
And we are here today with a very lengthy topic. But first, gotta get some of the formalities out of the way here. Today is March 21st, 2025. You know, we haven't meant to go sort of like a full month between episodes here, but life gets in the way as always, doesn't it?
Mm-hmm.
You can never just plan for everything, but right now we're only really 2 down. I know you set a goal for us. The goal is to do like at least 20 episodes in the year, which I think is a good goal. I think we can hit that.
Well, I'm right. And I mean, there's 52 weeks if we're doing it, every other week, ideally. It's like, yeah, we can miss like 6 times, but I think we've missed, like 2 so far? So we're already a third of the way down.
Right, so that's the one thing, is we're already a third of the way down, and that's not good. But, on the other hand, it's only March, so we're 2 down at about a quarter of the way through the year, so I figure if we keep on this pace, that means either we're gonna get really close to that goal, or we're gonna hit it. And who knows, there might be emergency stuff along the way that comes up that we're like, we couldn't have anticipated this happening, and so we get on to record, and there's another episode down. Like, you never know.
Plus, I mean, there is a chance, too, that, like, with our scheduling specifically, we might be able to record, like, maybe certain times. Like, we'll do one this week, we'll do one the following week. Like, not necessarily have to, like, get those ready in that tandem, but, like, to kind of help the process a little bit. I don't think that's inherently out of the realm of possibility. We're just busy people, though.
Indeed, that's just how life is. And speaking of being busy and having just things completely like over my head, I definitely had a couple of faux pas with the previous releases on episode 34. I do the whole thing, I change the new text like on the video version, and then I totally forget because I had a template for it that I made from like when I first started this new software. And so that episode, the video version was like 2.5 hours long originally, but the audio was only an hour 25. So I had to fix that. And then I'm getting up this morning, I'm working on getting ready to be here to record, and I'm thinking like, we started a new thing last time.
Mm-hmm.
Which would be our SpeakPipe page. I regret to say we have no messages. And a big part of that might be because I never put the link in the description of each version. So I fixed that this morning, and it'll certainly be in the description for this episode. But yeah, just a couple of like, screw-ups where it's like, you really don't want to do it, but sometimes it just brain's in a billion different places right now.
Oh no, that's understandable. But if stuff gets mixed around all the time, believe me, I get it.
And it's only us 2 doing this, so it's not like we have a bunch of people to check it over either. So, it's just, that's the way it goes, as they say. Anything interesting going on with you lately that we haven't caught up on?
The big ones right now, I mean, it's not really major news, but I finished Pokemon Scarlet recently.
Woo!
And I will be honest, I understand the hate from the technical standpoint, but from the actual game standpoint, I think it's probably one of the better Pokemons in recent years. Like, I'm a fan of, like, Pokemon Arceus, so for me, that whole open world idea, I really, really appreciate, because it just feels more organic to that type of game. But, like, the Switch hardware just cannot handle that right now. So I definitely understand why people were mad about it, but like if you actually play the game and just be like, I'm just gonna kind of see how this whole thing goes. It's a good story, minus the fact that I have to go to school, but that's not the point. But like I actually even almost finished the entire like original Pokedex. Like my girlfriend got Violet like a long time ago, so I knew I was gonna get Scarlet at some point, and I think I have like over 300 and some Pokemon now, like in the Pokedex, and there's only like maybe 400, I think, at least pre-DLC, which I still have to get the DLC. But the base game I did beat. and I kind of got to argue that I genuinely enjoyed it more than I expected.
Well, see, and I remember in recent episodes you were kind of talking like, I don't like it as much. I think I kind of like Sword and Shield better. So it sounds like by the end here you've kind of turned more into a Scarlet Violet person.
If I had to compare the two, I think that, like, story wise, I think they're pretty on par with each other. I think Scarlet and Violet does get a better one because their post game story is really good. And, like, that's not a lot of things that Pokemon games just have anymore. Certain versions do, but, like, overall, I think this is one of the better ones. So, like, with Sword and Shield, it's like the overall story, like, before the post game, I think is a little better, but at the same time, like, it's not bad. It's like they're both good in certain aspects of what they're doing. Sword and Shield, I think, is better in the technical aspect of it. It runs much smoother because I think that's what they were going for. And then Scarlet and Violet has a little bit more of an interesting story to kind of like balance out like the type of things that you're doing with it. Is it perfect? Hell no. I would never explain a Pokemon game as like this is the perfect game of all time. They never are. And there's a lot of reasons for each version and generation, but like they're still fun. That at the end of the day is still what I enjoy of the series.
So you got what you wanted to get out of it, and at the end, that's really all that matters. So hopefully that means then the trend is they're going to continue to trend upward.
Well, what?
You never know because it seems like the track record so far hasn't been so great, but you got to be going to the next game with an open mind.
And I think honestly, like that's where the problem lies with modern Pokemon when people are judging it, because it's like I think the nostalgia glasses really factor in for a lot of the older crowd where it's like, even anyone who's like first gens were like 4 or 5, it's like people really hammer home like that they enjoy those versions much more than like, Gen 8, Gen 9. And I'm like, Gen 8 and 9 are fine. Like they're good to play. And it's like I remember someone, like, I forget who it was, but someone made a very interesting hot take saying that Pokemon Let's Go Pikachu and Eevee are the, quote, best versions of Generation 1 games. So I think when it comes down to it, it really is this everybody's going to have an opinion, strong opinions about, like, compared to, like, where they started, what they are most accustomed to. But, like, the fact of the matter that I got, like, in the amount of time that I played, over 300 Pokemon, and a lot of it came down to, like, I was able to have no issues with experiencing my entire team, as opposed to, have to, like, use an experience share where one guy is getting experience and then the other person's just getting the bulk of it, and having to kind of keep rotating that. Having, like, that communal experience share was so much nicer. Like, I loved that immensely compared to the older games. Like the older games are cleaner in the sense of like what they're trying to go for, but like quality of life improvements have gotten better at the later games. I think that's something that not a lot of people talk about, or hell, even some people don't want to admit yet.
I would tend to think the latter right now because I can imagine a world where you go ahead and you play these newer games and you experience these and you kind of take them for granted because they're similar to other modern games. And then you go back to a game that you love and you're nostalgic for, and that's like, oh yeah, I forgot, doing this whole song and dance sucks.
Yeah.
I really wish I had this modern convenience that this game that in other ways I don't like as much gave me.
It's just so frustrating because it's like, I genuinely love, like, Soul Silver is one of my all-time favorites, but, like, I'm in the middle of playing that still right now, kind of like, I'm unwinding for the day, and I'll lay in bed, play it for, like, maybe half an hour or something, just to kind of move on and kind of train some guys that I have. And it, like, after playing Scarlet, it just makes me feel like, man, this could go so much faster right now. I think as the games have more and more Pokemon that you need to add in, I think that becomes the thing that they have to do. It's like, because what are they at now? They're at like 1,000 Pokemon now.
At least they have to be.
Yeah, like it's over 1,000, I think. So like you're telling me that it's like with all these Pokemon that I have to evolve and I have to catch and get trainer exclusives or whatever it might be, just that little difference of like giving the EXP share essentially at the beginning so that everybody is getting stronger, even if it's only like half, that speeds the process up so much nicer. I can literally go into a high level area with one of my best Pokemon, throw them out, go fight, and then everybody at the weaker levels gets EXP that's exponentially more because of the level that they're at. And I think that is such a healthy addition in there. And even the ability to like just throw the Pokemon out to do kind of an auto battle. And yeah, you're not getting as much experience, but like that speeds up everything so much nicer.
All right, I even think about with Sword and Shield, there was that whole issue that I think it's the National Dex is what it's called. That's just like you're not having all the Pokemon back. And
Yeah.
you're getting to a point here, like you said, where there's gotta be at least 1,000 of these. And I think people really need to sit back and ask themselves, do I want every game to have this many? Because then you're just never gonna finish it if you're trying to actually finish that Pokédex. Because there's just so many. Like your time is valuable, and there are other games to play too. Like I totally get where they're coming from in a sense, but what's wrong with a nice group of 400, 500, 600? I mean, it's fine how it is. I think people kind of blow some of those issues a little out of the water. But, I also say that as someone who's not a Pokemon person. So, I'm coming at this with an outsider perspective.
And I think for me, kind of before we go too in depth in the topic, I think part of that is that we've also come a long way since Gen 1, when it was 151 and it was much easier, where all you had to do was like catch everything that you can and then have a friend who had the opposite version and trade those so that you both could complete the Pokedex. I love the sociability of that, and I think that's still an important factor in these games to keep. But like I said, it's like with how many Pokemon there are, realistically, how often are you going to go out of your way to be throwing all these different Pokemon in? Especially when you kind of know who your initial team's going to be. Like, you're not spending every waking moment leveling everyone to 100. Like, that's just absurd, and I don't think anyone should do that unless you genuinely love this game and don't plan to start it over anytime soon.
Well, right.
But
And
for
I
me,
also think about, you said you generally know who your team's going to be. I could conceive of the idea, because you can have up to 6 Pokemon, if I recall, like in your party at one time.
yeah.
I could conceive of the idea that someone's party of 6 ends up not being in the game at all. I just find that very unlikely to happen. Like, you'll at least get a couple of the ones that you like in your party, probably.
Well, I think what I mean by like you kind of know what your team is. It's not saying, I've had these 6 since Gen 1. For me, it's whenever I play a game, like no matter what the generation is, I always try to keep kind of a variety team. Like so that I have a lot of my bases covered in terms of typing. But realistically, you're only going to get at max 12 for typings cuz all Pokemon can be up to 2 normally, I should say. But you have to kind of pick and choose what ones are you willing to keep, and you don't even necessarily have to have them all be a dual typing. I prefer it personally, but normally like there will still be somebody who like this latest run on Scarlet. I picked Luxray as one of my main ones, and that's a pure electric type. But the reason I kept it was because I got one that has like there's the terraform mechanic that they have. And I got one that had ice typing, so I could effectively call it an electric ice type at that point. And I'm able to kind of like balance it between a lot of these things where it's able to be like, okay, I have it for this thing, I have it for that thing. And like the terra typing thing is a whole other thing because it literally gives you the ability to essentially create the typing of the Pokemon in the fight. Take like my Luxray. Because it's an ice type, normally electric is weak to ground type moves. So if I switch it to an ice type, it loses the weakness it would normally have from ground, and then it also gains the ability because it had Ice Fang as one of its moves, which is an ice move, and it was able to do super effective damage against the ground type. because ice beats ground. So like I love the ability to kind of like switch it on the fly where you need it necessary. Or like certain Pokemon, like I had a Palisand, which is like a big sandcastle ghost Pokemon. It's a ghost ground normally, but it has an ability that says if it gets hit by a water attack, it increases its defenses. So my thought was, what if I make it a water Terra typing and it gets hit by a water type, so it already has the water resistance now, and it gets the boost for its defenses. It adds an element to the game that I hadn't seen before, which I think is still really fascinating. And like I'm very late to this party because I just beat Scarlet, how many years after the game has been out. But I do think that like mechanically there are some interesting things. The delivery, I think, is what a lot of people are more upset by. Like terraforming things are kind of cringe, for lack of a better word, because like they're effectively equated to like they have this like shiny outer coating that's the color of the type that they would be, and then this like weird headpiece thing. Like that's stupid. If you just kept it as like even the color coding, I think it would have been leagues better. But like it may have been a little bit harder to read, so I understand why they added the headpiece thing. But it's still like it shows that they are still trying to innovate the game, and I think that's the more important thing.
They're not being complacent. They're trying to keep the games fresh. It's just not appealing to everyone. And yeah, it's going to be hard to do that when you now have 30 some years of people having played these games. So,
well, right. And everyone's already got their favorites too. So it's like, it's really hard to basically show them, hey, this is going to be like what we're going to do moving forward. And then, like I said, the nostalgia glasses really play into a lot of those. As I get older and I play more of these Pokemon games, I think I am like I even have this issue of like my nostalgia gets the better of me. I love the Gen 2 games and I love the Gen 2 remakes from Gen 4, but I have that so high on a pedestal that it's hard for me to keep it in a reasonable like here's what it's doing right, here's what it's doing wrong context. So it's really hard to get out of the way of your own line of thinking and your own like bias in that case, especially when it comes to like this type of game. I think everybody has their favorite generation. They always will have their favorite generation. And I think for most of them, the problem is that they live in that childhood nostalgia from how it made them feel all those years ago when they first played it. That when something new comes, oh, it's too easy. Oh, this makes no sense. Oh, these Pokemon look wrong. Like, this isn't for you at the end of the day. If you go into it with an open mind, it's much better. And you can at least make a judgment for yourself. But if you're going to just say that, oh, Gen 3 was always my favorite, nothing will ever compare to it, and then every game you compare it to, it's like, well, this isn't how it was done this generation, it sucks because it's like, there's some really good ideas that they do. I think Arceus kind of got that ball rolling with like the whole being able to kind of have open world elements into the Pokemon franchise. And then Scarlet and Violet kind of adapted into that and kind of improved upon it in a more traditional sense for the games. So, like, I think that they're on the right track. I think they just need to kind of get that whole package delivered. I hope that's the case that we do with the new Pokemon Legends game that's coming out, but realistically, I don't know when that's going to be. And I hope for Pokemon and Game Freak sense that they do find the sweet spot. They do find the way to make those games hit exactly where they need to for like everyone to be close to happy with what they got.
Yeah, you're never going to please everyone, but hopefully you can please enough people that you're just not getting the bad press about it, at least.
I will say this, and this will be my final thought on this. I say that one thing they could do is implement a difficulty system, and I don't mean it in the sense of easy, medium, hard. I mean it in the sense of like what we used to play growing up, like how we traditionally played it from like the first how many generations to like the more modern generations, how they do it. And even going as far as like you could do like a Nuzlocke level that's already built into the game, because like Nuzlocke is effectively just its own thing. Like, do you know what that is?
Yeah, it's when you make a party, but once a particular member wipes, they can't come back.
Right. So something that they do, and this is part of the challenge, is that you have to catch the first Pokemon in any place that you encounter a Pokemon. So let's say you walk into the first route. If you see, say, a Pidgey, you can only catch that Pidgey, and that's it. Nothing else. So, like, if it dies, you don't get anything for that. So it's a challenge in the sense of you are trying to build a good team that you want to have while also giving yourself these stipulations. And like you said, if the Pokemon faints, they're out. You have to get rid of it. Like, whether it's put it in the box, release it. Some people are sick like that. I don't know why you would do that, but it's something that I want to do at some point, and that might actually be a topic down the road once I actually have the nuts to try it. It's such a good challenge, and like that was a self-imposed challenge somebody started, and now it's kind of become its own movement in a way for like fans of the game. For me, I think like if you can somehow implement a difficulty system into the Pokemon games, I think that's going to go a huge way for so many of those people that will stop complaining about modern Pokemon. Like do like I said, just do it as the old school way that we used to do it, the modern way, and then the Nuzlocke way. I'm telling you, people will flip if they hear that.
I think so, because you have to remember these games also are designed for kids.
Children.
Yep.
Yeah.
And the kids of 2025 are not the same as the kids of 2015 or the kids of 2005, let alone the kids of 1995. But they also grow up, and so they are going to play along the way. So you got to figure out that, and I think difficulty would be a good way to get around that issue.
Yeah, and I think it makes everybody happy with it, because it's like, you get to decide how it is. So if you complain, it's like, oh, this was too easy. I'm like, were you playing on the modern setting? Well, yeah. There's an actual old school setting, right? Like, you can play it like the OG games. I think the only hard part about that would be, like, trying to implement it while kind of involving everything in the story. I think the first two, it's not as difficult, but, like, I don't know. Maybe there's something, like, I'm overthinking on it, but I feel like it could cause some issues with the story-wise. But I could be wrong. But that's not important. So anyway, let's get moving to the actual topic of, like, what we're getting into.
Well, actually, I had one brief thing I wanted to share. I'm going to keep it very short here, since I know we're at about the 25-minute mark in recording here.
I'm so sorry. I didn't mean to make the Pokemon conversation my topic for the...
That's okay, but I wanted to share this because it's pretty momentous for me. Okay, I don't know how, if we've ever talked about this, but I don't really make a habit out of going to the movies. In fact, I bet you could list like 10 movies and you'd be lucky if I said I've seen one of them. Mm-hmm. It's just not really my thing. But over the weekend, the previous weekend, on March 16th, I believe, I was at the movie theater for the first time in almost 2 years. The last time I went to the movie theater would have been to see, to no one's shock or surprise, the Super Mario Brothers movie. Oh. And, generally when I watch movies, I'm still a kid at heart. I much prefer watching a good animated movie over a live action movie that is probably more targeted toward me, but in my eyes is just boring. Mm-hmm. So over the weekend, I saw the newly released The Day the Earth Blew Up. Are you familiar with it at all? Have you seen any of the marketing along the way?
I haven't seen a lot of the marketing. I have seen people talk about it. Wasn't it like the Looney Tunes movie that... No, that was Acme vs. Coyote I'm thinking of.
Yeah, that's the canceled one that they're still trying to revive. This is the one that made it through.
Okay.
And part of why I want to keep this short, too, is because I hope in the future, once we've gotten like past its release in the theaters, that I want to do a bigger review of it. In fact, I wrote plenty of notes because I have a lot of thoughts on it. But the long story short here, I thought it was really good. I was very pleased with it, and that's even as someone who's probably more critical than others. If I was forced to give it a number score, I would give it an 8 out of 10. I was that pleased with it. I think fundamentally it's a very good movie. I had a few background quibbles with it, nothing that like totally brings it down and make me be like, I don't like this movie, but just things that I would have liked to see done differently. But I'm sure we'll talk about that some other time when I want to commandeer that as the topic. But Now that I've gotten that little bit of recent information out of the way, why don't we move on to our big main topic? And what we've kind of been trying to do, folks. I liked last time how Boom here had like the one big topic, because he seemed to like going for like these big research-based or philosophical topics is how I've kind of approached it. Wouldn't you agree?
I'm gonna level with you. It's not my intention to do this much research into them. It's more of I just get real wrapped into like a topic where I start finding really interesting stuff, and then I'm like, oh, that's really cool. I like this. And then all of a sudden, next thing I know, I'm like, it's half an hour later, and I'm sitting here, and I'm like, where did I go? Like I was just trying to look up one thing, and now bam.
Well, but I think it makes an interesting approach to this. So I'm thinking we're going to experiment a little bit, depending on how things go. You know, who knows? We might end up with two topics if we end up in the future keeping on doing this, and then we only have an episode that would end in about 2 minutes from where we're recording right now. But I don't foresee that happening right now. And what I wanted to talk about today is something. I had a little list of topics, things that I thought would be interesting to go through at some point. And as someone who has, over the years, been very much associated with one particular system maker, I wanted to go over this thought of like, well, why would you pick one system, or why might you decide to go for multiple in terms of games, and what is appealing for you? So I made a little chart here. You know, some pros and some cons. I got my pros in green, I got my cons in red. But we also have to factor in the personal computer. So I have that in its own little separate category as reasons why you may want to go for one system over the other. And so I wanted to talk through what I've got here and see, like, you know, maybe you have some counterpoints to some of these. And some of the cons here I have are literally the counterpoints of the other systems as well, but I'm sure there are things that I didn't think about that you might find interesting. So, like, one of the reasons, like I've gone for the one system approach, because generally I know what I want to play, and a lot of the major titles, for example, on the PlayStation and the Xbox are either gonna come out on this other system that I want to play it on. In this case, modern times, it's the Switch, and soon to be its sequel. But otherwise, it might not be something that I have any interest in. So it's really not going to affect me one way or the other. But that approach is going to work for everyone. So I wanted to have some more reasons that I think could be a little bit more universal. So did you want to like go through each column in order? Did you want to like kind of go, you know, one system and then multiple, then how to factor PC, or how do you think we should tackle this list here when you gander at it?
Okay, so as someone who does exactly what you described in some of these instances, I think what we should do is go down the list on pick one system, go through all that, the pros and cons, then pick multiple, then how to factor in PC.
All right, well, that works for me. So the first thought that came to my mind with picking one system is it's pretty economical, right? If you only have to make one hardware purchase, assuming that there's no like mid-gen update or other version or like special edition you want, you know, if you know that you just want this particular system, you get it, and then you're done. And you're only $300 down, $400, $500, however much it is. So I tend to think it's very economical.
As I'm sitting here staring at my multitude of systems and I hear the word economical, never heard of her.
So see, you're kind of the opposite in that sense. So like, do you have multiple of the same system, or is it just like different systems?
No, I have a bunch of different systems. Like when it comes to like these three columns, I'm pick multiple and how to factor into PC. And I can explain my reasoning once we get more toward that. I used to be a pick one system guy. Like I was Nintendo through and through for like the longest time. And then like after I made this realization I have disposable income, Yeah, things change very fast.
Well, and that could just be as well a difference of priorities if you think about it. That's not to say that like, yours is wrong and mine is right, but I don't like spending extra if I don't have to. I can think of, kind of like I said, a handful of games that would be exclusive on, say, the PlayStation 5 that I want. In fact, early on, one of our first episodes where we talked together, we talked about Astrobot for a little bit, and it's like, that's a game that really makes me want a PS5. But am I really going to spend money on just that one game? Probably not.
And I agree with that line of thought, because like for me to want a new system, my argument is there 10 games on the system that make me want to go get this? And if the answer is no, I don't buy it. Now, it doesn't say that I can't get it later when there is actual games that I'm like excited to go try, but it doesn't, like for the PS5 for example, like I haven't hit that point, but I have it for a slightly different reason in addition to that, where it's most of the stuff that I wanted on PS5 is now slowly kind of creeping its way onto other systems or on PC for that matter. So I just don't feel the need to buy one, if that makes sense.
And that's one of the things that we need to factor in here, too, is these games come out on multiple systems, right? So there's something to be said for which version you want. Not that I don't want to get quite ahead of that, because we'll get to that shortly. Yeah. Another reason that I would go for in terms of picking a single system, if you want to go that way, and this isn't going to be something that appeals to everyone. I think in one sense it will, in another sense it won't. And it becomes easier to purchase games. You don't have to think about like, well, do I want this version or do I want that version that's got that thing? It's like, well, this is what I have, so that's the version I'm going to get. In a similar way, I look at my shelves here and I have a very large, like I have 3 full stacks, three almost full shelves of these DVD racks that I was so kindly given that are just straight up red. So it's a lot easier to collect games too. You don't really have to decide if there's a better version. The one you have is the one you have. Of course, then there's the flip side, which is like, well, then you might be stuck with the worst version of the game if you're on like a particularly weak piece of hardware, like a certain portable unit.
And that's something that I think that a lot of people need to take into consideration for certain games. Like, for me, I've had certain games that I own that I don't think I would own on a different system. And I think the only reason for that is because of the comparison of hardware at the end of the day. For me, like, okay, so I love Persona 5 Royal. I've made that very clear previously on the show. It has a Switch port. I would not buy the Switch port personally because I bought it on PS4 first. I loved it. And then I bought Persona 5 Vanilla first. Loved that. Then bought Royal. And I loved that one even more. But then Royal got ported over to the Switch. Now, on the idea of accessibility, that's great. But, like, the PS4 to the Switch is the equivalent in my mind of saying, like, I'm going from, like, a reliable car to a toaster. It's such a downgrade, I feel like. And, like, I'm not saying, like, it can't be good, but, like, that game was designed with the PlayStation in mind when they made it. And then the Switch ported it over. They had to probably cut some corners. They had to make sure that, like, this thing didn't make the Switch explode. So, like...
Right.
I think, like, and if it's the only way that you can play it, like, that's not inherently wrong. Like, this is coming from my personal opinions on how I view and how I choose where I buy my games as someone who owns multiple systems. But, like, it's not saying, like, they're all inherently bad. Like, for me, I have 3 different copies of Hades. I love Hades. That is, like, my number 3 game of all time. I have it digitally on Switch. I have it on my Steam account. And I have a physical copy for PS4. I have beaten it on Switch. Runs great on there. Beaten it on PC. Love it there. I just kind of have the physical copy on PS4 because I really wanted a physical copy of a game that I genuinely loved and not just a digital-only situation. So, like, not all games are treated the same when it comes to, like, multi-platform in that sense. But there are certain games that it's like when they were made for, like, a stronger piece of hardware. first, going backward in a way can really degrade the experience, I feel like.
It's tough to say in this modern sense because the Switch really complicates it being a portable device. But then there's also something to be said for, like in the case of Persona 5 Royal, it's on Switch, it's on PS5 and 4, it's on your Xbox, it's also on Steam. And then there's also the Steam Deck. So really, you could get the best of both worlds. But then you also have to have the investment of having a Steam Deck, which is a much more expensive piece of hardware, and you already have to have Steam, so there's the barrier to entry just ends up being higher. But, you know, the point I'm trying to make here is, like, if you really want that best of both worlds, you can get there.
And I think another thing to add on that with the Steam Deck situation is that not all games on Steam are compatible with the Steam Deck yet. So there is also that portion that you have to kind of play around with, because it's like, oh, I'm really excited to play this on Steam, but I only have my Steam Deck right now because, like, say your computer's out of commission for whatever reason, like you need a new part. But if your game that you're excited to play for isn't Steam Deck compatible, well, now what do? Like, you don't have the Steam Deck to be able to play it right now. So you're kind of just stuck in that aspect. And I think that's something else that kind of is important to kind of realize when you're selecting a specific system. Like, Nintendo especially, I think, is the best example because they have the exclusive titles to back it up, wanting to Switch, like, even on its own. And they are getting much more third-party support than I think in recent years. So in that case, it's like, I feel like, at least on a casual standpoint, I don't think the Switch is inherently a bad choice for them. It's fairly cheap. It runs fairly well with most games that aren't, like, super graphically intense. And you have the portability as well as the ability to play in your own living room or in your bedroom or wherever you have it set up. But, like, I don't know. It really is kind of a dealer's choice situation. I do think, like, there are consoles that are designed for specific people in mind, if that makes sense.
Well, right. And then you get to the point of, well, how much do you care about graphics? If you're a graphics snob, then at that point you're probably just a PC gamer. And that's fine. If that's what you care about the most, Godspeed. If you're like me, I love handheld games. Most of my childhood game memories are on original DS games. So I like having it portable. And sure, could I, in a similar sense, go with the Steam Deck then? I could, but, well, I'm already going to have this investment because, like you said, I'm going to want those exclusive titles. And I'm also not nearly as much of a graphics snob as other people. That's not to say that I'm okay with games looking bad or games running poorly. I would really prefer to have better running versions of games, but I'm not going to decry that if I don't have to. But like you said, that's a very personal decision. I also think, to your point, too, we have to consider, and this is kind of what I was getting at when it's like the higher barrier to entry. If you're the casual crowd, the Steam Deck's probably not even in your, like, field of vision. Like, you've maybe heard of it, but, like, if you're someone who is listening to this show, for example, you probably have. We just have to remember that's not everyone. And that's kind of, and I'm trying to target more the everyone here as opposed to just the hardcore gamers. Because as much as I love them, we have to remember they're only a small portion of the people playing games.
Right.
Moving on into some more of the pros, I wanted to add another thing if you're more of a I like collecting games kind of person, which is, if you have one system, it gets a lot easier to build a big collection. It's not like you're spreading out your games across multiple systems where it's like, well, I have a lot of the stuff of the modern generation, but they're kind of like a few of them are Xbox games, and then I got a few of them on the PlayStation, and then a handful are just downloaded to my computer. So, you know, if you're someone who's very satisfied by, like, wow, I see all these together and it's so big, that might be a reason to go with one system. Is it a silly reason? Sure, but I think it's legitimate. Some people just like that, you know? People can have their own silly little reasons for wanting something.
And that's something that, like, for me, that tickles the dopamine receptors in my monkey brain when I see all the games, like, put on shelves, and I'm just like, yeah, that's great. Oonga boonga. Like, my brain is so happy seeing my games just in a collection, like, on the wall. It just gives me a feeling of, I don't want to say it's pride, because that's not the right word. It just makes me feel happy because it's like I get to enjoy so many of these, or I have enjoyed so many of these games. And then there's still ones that I haven't yet to touch yet that I'm going to have a chance to actually explore. And I think the other thing too is like when you have physical games, and I don't think you have this on the list, but if, say, for whatever reason, you have something in your collection, you realize that you're not really getting any use out of it, you can at least give that back to, like, sell it for like $10 or whatever, and someone else will find enjoyment with it, even if you don't. Digital games, that's not the case. If you buy digital, you don't get to refund that decision most of the time. Like, you're stuck with that decision, and you have that kind of almost like as a stain on your gaming record of like, well, I really didn't enjoy this, and I can't believe I wasted $60 or whatever it might be for this game.
Yeah, the physical versus the digital is its own entirely separate discussion. Like I guarantee we're gonna get to a point where we're like, ah man, the well of topics is dry right now. Why don't we do that one? But I agree. I even if you only get $5 out of it, okay, well, at least I got a little bit of money back on this.
Mm-hmm.
Kind of similarly, because I agree with that whole like dopamine point. It's very satisfying just to see like I have a wall of this particular color or a wall of just this spine of a particular game art. You can see that you put a lot of time into putting these all together.
Mm-hmm.
So I think another value of having one system is, you're putting more time into that than you would otherwise. If you only have your PlayStation, well, it's not like you're going to be able to split your time between other systems because that's what you got. You're not going to come out of it thinking like in a few years, like, man, I barely ever turned that thing on because that's what you got, right? You have to use it if you're going to play games. Now, you could end up in that situation because you just don't play games, and that's fine, but that's its own entirely separate situation.
And I think the other thing too with that is it's like, as someone who owns multiple systems, I go through kind of spurts through which ones that I'm wanting to play. Like, I'll go through a PS4 phase, I'll go through like right now I'm in a big Switch and PC phase. But like I have literally had my Switch sit and gather dust for like months before I finally picked it up and said, "You know what? I want to play this right now." And that's something that's really hard as someone who has multiple systems because you only can play one game at a time, which means you can only go on one console at a time. So, kind of picking and choosing what you want to do at the end of the day is interesting because it's like, and this is part of the reason why, like, when I started this year, I gave myself I want to finish 12 games this year. So, essentially one a month. And it didn't matter if it was short, it didn't matter if it was long, it was just finish this game. And so far, I am currently at 6, and we are only 3 months in.
Sounds like you're going to meet your goal for sure.
Well, now, and here's the thing that's nice about it, is that for me, I had a mix of long and short games. Like, the 2 longest games I've beaten this year are probably, I would assume, Scarlet and Fire Emblem 3 Heroes, which I was playing last year, so I don't know if I'd really count it comparatively to this year. But Unicorn Overlord was another one I put like almost 100 hours in. And then on the flip side, it was BioShock, which is probably only about like a 10-hour game if know what you're doing, which in some cases I did not, so it might have been a little bit longer, whatever. But then there was also 2 games that I played that were incredibly short. The Were Cleaner, which is where you play a janitor who is a werewolf, and you have to make it through the week without people noticing that you are a werewolf. And then the original Metal Slug, because I have that on Steam, and I was like, you know what, I'm going to play this. And it's just an arcade shooter. Like, that game went really fast. I beat it literally in like an hour or 2. Being able to kind of mix your timing, I think, also helps out. Like, if you're in the mood to play a long game, play a long game. But if you want to, like, do what I'm doing, which is, like, trying to beat these games, like, in a certain amount of time, like, at the rate I'm going, I might hit 20 on the year. And that's counting like longer version games. But like you have to know what you want to play. And like I'm of the mind of like you are genuinely not enjoying a game. Why are you playing it still? I wouldn't sit here and tell people that you have to kind of like force yourself to finish a game because it's like, oh, it finally gets good 40 hours in. No, why are you playing 40 hours of a game to get to the good part?
Right. If you're not having fun, just stop playing it. And maybe you'll come back to it later. Or maybe you'll realize, you know what, I don't like that. And I don't want to keep playing it, so I'm going to move on to something else. And that's fine.
And we have the internet. If you really want to like see how a game ends, there are how many YouTubers that are probably out there putting all the cutscenes on for a game so people can watch it from start to finish. Because they know they don't have the time to sink in a 100-hour RPG, but they really want to see how this whole thing goes.
Yeah. Makes it very simple if you've got alternatives, that's for sure.
Mm-hmm.
All right, and then the last pro I have here, and this is a much more modern innovation that's helping us out here. The joy of cross-platform multiplayer is helping all those people who were like, oh, everybody's got an Xbox. And here I am with my stupid PlayStation, and I can't play with my friends. But now, through the power of cross-platform, that's not a thing anymore. And I think that's very, very, very helpful. I think it's a thing that we really need to be encouraging game developers to make for these online games, because it just makes people happy. Now, if they can't do it, you know, it is what it is, I guess. But if they can do it, they really should, shouldn't they?
Yeah, and I think with, like, that's more for, like, the more, I would say, intensive online games. I think there's certain ones that, like, you don't need to have that, per se. Like, if you're playing Overcooked, like, unless you actively have, like, a distance issue where, like, your friends are, like, states over or something. I feel like that's more of a couch co-op game at the end of the day. But, like, games like Borderlands, games like Marvel Rivals, because, like, Marvel Rivals has crossplay where you can play on PlayStation, Steam, and Xbox, and everyone can play in the same match despite being on all three of those systems. It is doable. People know it's doable. It's that you have to be willing to put that in, because at the end of the day, when you're making a game, you're not just making a game necessarily for one specific company, you're making it for the masses. So you want to, like, have people be able to experience the game however they can. And I think kind of ties in with a earlier point that you made too, of you get certain access to certain games, even if it is only on that system. And I think that's a huge thing with the same argument on cross-platform. You want your giant group of people that you want to sell to be able to experience it. I don't care if it's someone's playing it on the Switch or PS5. I want them to just enjoy the game that I made. You know what I mean?
Yep. It's all about making sure whoever wants the game can play it. Unless there's a really good reason for it to be exclusive. And obviously there certainly are good reasons for games to be exclusive, like if it's a first-party game, or if the folks who make that hardware helped finance the game, and so they're like, well, then we want it on our system and our system alone. Like, those are legitimate reasons. But if you're making a multi-platform game anyway, and honestly, I don't even care how big or small you might think the multiplayer base is. If you're making a game and it's got an online mode, if anything, you're just making it take much longer for the servers for that game to be dead. You're making it harder for, nobody's playing this game on the Switch anymore, but they sure do love it on their PS4. Oh, well, sucks to be me. I don't have that version. You're making that person, those few people who still want to play it online, still be included. And that counts for something.
Right.
Now, that's all that I had for pros as far as one system. Is there anything that you thought of that I didn't write down on this list?
I mean, I kind of already touched on some stuff that kind of more expanded on it. So I think I've hit the pros as best I can.
Now, as far as the cons, then, it tends to be a lot of the inverse as some of these games. Like, we were just talking about cross-platform. Well, not every game has it. So, might be screwed. Okay? Got to deal with it.
Mm-hmm.
So, in that sense, you probably want to have another system. We talked earlier, like, hey, sure, that game is available on that piece of hardware, but is it a version you really want to play? If your choices are play the cloud version of Resident Evil 7 or don't play it, or play it on another hardware, a piece of hardware rather, what are you going to go with?
Like,
if you have the option, probably play it on another piece of hardware.
Right, and I think that kind of goes back to what I was saying about the Persona 5 Royal example, is that it is probably the worst version on the Switch. It's not saying it can't be good. I don't personally know, but I'm not expecting it to blow the PS4 or PS5 versions out of the water. So this is the best example I can give for my personally. I had a real toaster of a laptop in college. My first laptop when I was running stuff on Steam. I was playing a game called Mark of the Ninja, right? And it was a fun game, but I thought it was like weirdly slow and I couldn't figure out what it was. I just thought it was the speed of the game. I recently, like, I think it was a year or two ago, I booted it up for the first time on my desktop. I found out that it was not supposed to be that slow, and I beat the game with like
suddenly it runs like a dream.
It literally was like half speed on the laptop, and that's how I beat it the first time. So at some point I'm gonna have to play it again at actual speed, like it's supposed to, as the Lord intended. But I just remember like that sudden shock of like, holy crap, I was playing it wrong this entire time. Another example I think that's like a good indicator of like this is the bad version of the game is Sonic Unleashed, right? So,
yep.
Full disclosure, it is not a good game on any system, but
people are coming around on it, at least on the daytime content. But that's a whole discussion for another time, I'm sure.
I will say this as someone who beat that game as a kid multiple times. It is not a good game because I played the Wii version. To give you context, the Wii version of Sonic Unleashed was so unable to process certain aspects of the Xbox 360 and PS3 versions. Because fun fact, in the Xbox and PS3 versions, there were actually supposed to be these like hub worlds in like these different cities across the world when you were playing that you're supposed to go run around and talk to. The Wii couldn't handle that with everything else going on with the game. So their workaround was PNG and a point and click at whoever you were talking to, and it was just text bubbles with a cutout of a character. That was it.
I think we're losing a little bit of sight because you have to remember the PS2 and the Wii version and the PS3 and the 360 version of the games. They're totally different games as well, right? And that's a perfect case in point. Is the hub worlds are totally different, but like the gameplay between both versions are also very different.
To an extent, yes. But overall, like, the Wii version is leagues worse than the other two. And I don't mean it just because of the hub world thing. It's the Wii had a hard time processing a lot of those instances. And, like, we're talking about this is the worst version of a arguably bad Sonic game in general. So when you kind of put it in the context of, like, everything we've talked about, it was, like, what the worst version of the game you could have. That is kind of the risk that you have to run sometimes. Because, like, in the case of, like, Nintendo versus Xbox versus PlayStation, you have the issue of you're gonna find a way to get all these on here, but it doesn't necessarily mean that they're all going to be running exactly the same. And for some of us, like me, we're fully understanding of that. So we're not gonna, sneeze at it. Like, I play a few games. Like, best way I can explain it is like when I played Hades on Steam versus I played it on Switch. I did not notice a dip in quality. Now, I played the Switch version first, I played the PC version first, and then I got it on Switch, and it ran so much better than I was expecting it to. But I don't know how much of that is the software being optimized for the system of what they're trying to do, which I'm sure was the case in a lot of that.
Well, right, and devs should be as best as they can. Doesn't matter what it is, whether it's hyper powerful or not. They should be having a big focus on optimization, as far as I'm concerned. But that's a whole separate issue.
Right, and kind of like going into another couple of examples, and I'll try to be quick on this. When it comes to certain games that like they're designed with like the more next gen system in mind, like Doom Eternal and Witcher 3 are two examples that I would argue are very good illustrators of this. Just because the Switch can run those two, like it has copies of them you can play on the Switch, they were designed in mind first for much more stronger software or much stronger hardware with the Xbox One and the PlayStation 4, and in some cases the PS5 and PC. They got it to run on the Switch, and it's passable, I think is the best way to explain it. But you have to realize that it's like in certain aspects you may be playing the worst version. Like the Cyberpunk debacle. People got mad because it didn't run as well on PS4 and Xbox One compared to the new gen consoles and PC. When you hit that point of this is way more difficult than it needed to be, that's where I think a lot of people get pissed about it. And it sucks because you want to like give a lot of people accessibility. I think that's a huge thing when it comes to that. And that probably is going to be a huge thing that we talk about in the multiplayer or the multi-console thing. But like it's so hard to make it an even playing field for literally everyone to experience it, because like just even like the comparison of between PS5 and PS4, Cyberpunk ran crap out of the gate on PS4. And I think that's something that like not enough people talk about, where it's like if you're going to be putting this on as many consoles as possible and you're trying to optimize it the best way, you may have to make some sacrifices. Maybe it's graphical quality. Maybe it's you can't have the draw distance too far because suddenly things are getting loaded too much. Like I know Horizon Zero Dawn, which is a game I genuinely love on the PS4, and I have it on Steam also. What they kind of did to kind of help optimize the performance of it is they don't have anything behind your character loaded in when you play.
Well, and I'm sure that would help performance pretty significantly. If you don't have to have it, don't load it.
It's a very intricate system. 'Cause they're not the first ones to do this. There are other games that have done it. But basically, like, when you're playing as Aloy, everything in your field of vision of how you are seeing the game is all loaded in. But everything behind you does not exist. It's effectively like this weird object permanence thing where until you turn around and you see it, this is not part of the game right now. And it's a very interesting way to kind of help reduce the bog down when it comes to like the system running and everything. And like it's part of the reason why it can get away with the graphical quality that it can, even on PS4 standards. Without that, I think it would have easily been a travesty if it tried to like do what I think Scarlet and Violet did, which was I think they have the whole world loaded in at one time. So like the Switch is on fire basically when you're trying to play it for too long.
Right.
But at least like if you take like how Horizon Zero Dawn did it, where half of the world just doesn't exist until you turn around, that's half of like the load completely lifted off its shoulders. So like it's able to kind of get through it a little bit better.
Right. Okay, so I only have a couple more cons as far as the single system goes. Pretty obvious one. Not every game is available on what you want. Kind of to your point here, right?
Mm-hmm.
If you can't work it on that system, it ain't coming out on that system. So if that's what you got, sucks to be you. And of course, exclusives just end up making that worse. If you want a first-party game, well, better have that first-party system.
I do think in the case of that, though, that is starting to become, at least outside of Nintendo, it's becoming a little bit more manageable. Sony putting a bunch of their stuff on Steam, and now and I'm going to probably talk about this a different time because I really want to go into it, is like with Xbox saying like their new console will have Steam available capabilities. Basically says we can play Sony games on Steam through the new Xbox. And it's a weird loophole thing. So, like, exclusivity is becoming a little bit more manageable in some aspects. not counting Nintendo. Nintendo will not play that game anytime soon, if at all. And it's understandable. I don't blame them. But like Sony and Microsoft at least seem to kind of be trying, whether directly or indirectly, to kind of fix that problem in some capacities.
Well, right, and it's funny you mentioned that because that is actually the last con I have on the list in terms of owning multiple systems is the increasing availability of previous exclusives is starting to make owning multiple pieces of hardware make less sense. Mm-hmm. If I can play MLB The Show on whatever I want, and I'm a baseball person, mm-hmm. do I need another piece of hardware then? If I have a perfectly good PC, and to your point, I can play Spider-Man on it, mm-hmm. do I need a PS4 or 5? Like, if I can...
Yeah, it's a
valid question, right. But then it might not be the best version. Kind of hopping over a little bit into the how to factor in PC, too. Ironically, sometimes the PC version can end up being a bad one. I think about Batman Arkham Knight as the big example where it's like the console versions were fine, but for whatever reason, the PC version, when it first came out, was just horrific.
So this is a side tangent. When I was in college, I worked with an internship with Shack News. This was like for a semester, and one of the articles I had written, and it's still on the website, you can actually look it up, talked about when that initially happened. The Arkham Knight debacle on Steam was insane.
Because my God.
It was literally like one of those moments of like, I didn't expect it to take this much traction as much as it did. Like, I by no means am like taking credit, like I was the one to break it or anything like that. I just noticed it back in the day because like I was looking at some stuff online and kind of like seeing what people were, talking about and complaining about, and that was like one of the big things that people were mad about with Arkham Knight on PC. So like that was what I pitched, and I ended up writing that article, and it was hilarious because of just it led into Steam has to offer refunds now because of that whole situation. That game being so bad at launch is the reason we have Steam returns now.
Yeah, and there you go. That's the power of the media too, just kind of showcasing, because it's pretty obvious if you were to get that version that it was the bad version, quote unquote, but then it ends up being a whole thing beyond that, right? Shall we move on to the multiple systems, though, since we've opened that can, so to speak?
Sure, we can do that. I'm also going to send you this because I want you to enjoy how bad my writing was back in the day. now that I thought about it, it's like I really want you to witness that firsthand at some point.
I'll have to send you a video later, too, because I want you to see a counterpoint perspective on Sonic Unleashed, but that's a whole different tangent. Anyway, so as far as multiple systems go, some of the good stuff, well, geez, you have access to as many games that are available across all those systems. Mm-hmm. If you have them all, I mean, geez, what can't you play at that point, right? Pretty obvious, but still worth saying. Similarly, there's not really such thing as exclusives if you have those multiple systems. Sure, okay, that game is exclusive, but if you have every hardware option, well, you're just going to get the exclusive version of the game. Obviously. Similarly, can pick the best version of multi-platform games. You have no way of avoiding whichever version. God, I can't formulate the sentence. The version you get is probably going to be the best one, unless you want one of those particular benefits. If you want the portability, but you don't have a Steam Deck, but if you want the better performance and you don't care that you only have to play it at home, that's up to you. Another major pro. It makes it pretty likely you can play with your friends, especially because, like we said, not every game has cross-platform. It'd be nice if they did, but if you got the system that your other friends are playing on, there you go. Your problem is solved.
And I think that's a huge win in PC's court a lot of the time because, like, so many people nowadays have access to computers. So, like, it's easier to play. Like, recently, like, some of my buddies played Borderlands 3 together, and we have a 4-man. We all have good enough PCs for it that we all were able to play it, and that's a huge thing for nowadays. Especially, like, gaming for some people can be such a social thing that you kind of forget that it's like accessibility really can help with that in that case.
Yeah. If all you want to do is play the game, you just gotta make it available, right?
Mm-hmm.
I kind of sped through a lot of those positive points, though. I didn't mean to gloss over them. Were there any ones that you wanted to expand on before I move on to the negatives?
Um, I think when it comes to like the one specific thing in that second one you have about not really a such thing as exclusive anymore, I do kind of agree with that to an extent. But like it's also one of those things where it's like exclusivity is really hard to really make a thing anymore unless you're Nintendo and some Sony properties. It's not saying that they won't try to kind of keep their, best IPs to their, close to their heart. But like the ability to be able to play certain ones now on multiple systems, like the Crash Insane trilogy and the Spyro trilogy, I think are huge examples of that, where it was like they were Sony for the longest time and now everybody's able to access them. And not to mention that they're essentially remastered versions of it all, which is a godsend for some people. And I think when it comes to like the multiple systems thing, it's nice to have like the old system if possible, but like if there's a better quality version of it for a system you own, I would just worry about getting that at that point. So it kind of ties in a little bit about like that plus, saying you can pick the best version of a multi-platform game. Or if you're lucky, it depends on like certain games. Like I've seen the Spyro and Crash trilogy games have run phenomenally across all platforms. So sometimes there's not even an argument at the end of the day of like which one's the best. It's like these just all really work well. Just whatever you own, get it.
Yeah, I think with those ones in particular, it's a huge thing. Like, that's really just what do you want? Do you want graphics? Do you want portability? Do you want to have the headache of what all has to go into a PC to get that very best version? Or do you just want the simplicity of putting it in your console, but you still want the slightly better version? Mm-hmm. It's a very personal choice, but there are some like objective characteristics to it. I also don't think we want to lose sight too with those retro games, and this too could be a whole nother separate topic in an episode. The idea of, well, we still need those old versions available because, for one thing, they might literally just have exclusive content that isn't in that new version. But I think there's also something to be said for like, well, just because they changed the new version of the game to what this is now doesn't mean the way it was done previously is wrong and isn't worth playing.
Right.
I brought this up last time.
I think that's a good example is like the old school Mario Brothers, like when it first came out, like Super Mario Brothers compared to Super Mario Brothers All-Stars.
Mm-hmm.
Like, they're both good games. I would still argue playing the original is better because you're playing it as it was initially intended. But it kind of goes back to our emulation topic that we had a while back, where sometimes the only way to get it is through emulation. But if you want to play it, like, and not feel guilty for, like, whatever reason, if you don't want to, like, emulate, having accessibility in that case is also important, too. Anyway.
Right. The example I was going to use, because I think I talked about this last time too, or actually, I can't remember. My original notes before I changed it to being like, I want to talk about the movie I saw, is like every time when I edit episodes, I think I keep listening to it and we're like, oh, I should have talked about this thing too in response. So it might have been in those notes, but since newer versions of games can be so very different, like a very great example to me is with those Another Code games I played last year. The Switch version, way different from the DS and the Wii versions of those games. So I would want those to be able to be available to people because it's one thing to play a third-person from the back adventure game. It's a totally another thing to play a dual screen. Top screen is more of a point-and-click interface that gets moved to the touch screen, and then when you're moving around, it's top-down. Like, such extreme different versions of a game. It's like, you need to make those available. Digression over, though. Mm-hmm. As far as the cons go, another pretty obvious one, it is a heck of a lot more expensive to own multiple pieces of hardware.
Not me spending how many
Well,
thousands of
even
dollars, if not tens of thousands of dollars over the years.
right, even if you just bought, a Switch is $299.99, right? $300, we'll just say. A PS5, I guess we'll say you want the I'm not going to go with the Pro. I'm just going to go with the original with the disc. That version is, I see it going for $450. That seems a little low. I would think it's normally 500. Yeah, 500 sounds right. And then the Xbox Series X has to be similar, right? So you're looking at a good $1,300 if you don't even factor in how much a computer costs. I'm not trying to point this out to you here. I'm just trying to look at the reality here, right? Like, it costs a lot, and you might just not have that money sitting around,
Well, for sure. I had to save up for my PC when I had to buy it, because I think mine was like, when I bought it brand new, it was like 1,800, I think.
Right. Oh, yeah, and then a PC alone, if you want to have a really good one, can be just as expensive as owning all three pieces of hardware. So, like, I think that's a big part, too, of why you see people increasingly doing I'm going to have a Switch and I'm going to have a PC, and that's it. Because the PC will cover those, like, big boy games, as you kind of established here, and the Switch will cover those Nintendo games you want and things that you might just want portably. And it's, in that sense, the cheapest way to do it.
Mm-hmm.
Especially because you also have to remember the PC won't go obsolete. I should have pointed that out in my factoring PC as well. I'm just now realizing this. Another issue when it comes to multiple systems, the PlayStations and Xboxes in particular are becoming very, very similar to each other. Are they not?
Yeah, I definitely agree with that, because, like, when you see modern consoles, at least in the Sony and the Microsoft spaces, it's effectively you're picking which one do you want more. It's like two brands of cars that have like a similar model. They're effectively the same. It just comes down to personal preference.
It's like buying the Grand Caravan versus the Town and Country for so many years, kind of like you said with the cars. I think that's a great example. They are pretty much the exact same car, but just with a different brand on them. And that's, God, I feel like it's a very good simile as far as what the PlayStation and Xbox are, because you look at the specs and they're like, well, geez, those are very close to one another. So you're really just going on exclusives at that point. And now if we're getting into this place, where they're becoming more available, it's like, well, yeah, what are you doing? And kind of filtering into that, well, because of those similarities, well, you might just end up defaulting to one platform anyway, right? If you have a PlayStation and an Xbox and they're so similar, well, geez, why not just play one of them at that point,
I think also on that point, and it may not just be the similarities, but like if like kind of what we were talking about, if your friends all gravitate toward one, you might gravitate toward one specifically, just so that you are able to actually access these with your friends.
Yep, if your friends are all Xbox people, well, you're probably an Xbox person too. And it might not be through choice. It might just be what it is. All right, and then we enter our last column. How do we factor in PC? And PC is a tough thing to factor in because, for one thing, they're multi-purpose machines.
Mm-hmm.
I am not gaming on this right now. I'm using this PC in front of my face to record this podcast. I can write a document on it. I can edit a video on it. Mm-hmm. So, to that point, sure, it might cost $1,300 to have a good computer, but I can do so much more with it. So that kind of complicates things.
Yeah.
Similarly, like I said, they don't really become obsolete. I mean, they do. Like, Windows 10 here is soon going to stop being supported for security updates, and Windows 11 requires certain hardware. Mm-hmm. So, but then you're going to just be upgrading. But it's still a computer. I guess you start getting into a God, I can't remember what it is, but it's like that ship. The ship where it's like, well, if it is it the same ship if it's built entirely out of new parts, or is it a new ship, You're getting into that situation.
I think there's a certain point though with like, when it comes to computers, this is more for me. Like, I'm at some point wanting to get a new computer entirely. Mine is almost It's like 7 or 8 years old now. It might even be older. So for me, it's like, yeah, I've had to replace some of the parts on it, and thankfully, one of my roommates at the time, they were able to help out with me figuring out what parts did I need and went as far to actually put them in themselves. But there's a certain point where like it's everything with like technology. It becomes obsolete at a certain point. Even if you're not like doing the most strenuous tasks on it or something, you still will probably have to replace it at some point. Now, thankfully, computers by comparison to like how they used to be are much more readily available. So I think for PC gaming, it's like if you really want to get into it, the bar of accessibility is a lot better than it previously was, because like it's not even just like desktops, it's even good laptops exist now, like that run effectively as a desktop. My friend Christian actually has one similarly, where he can literally play all these games on Steam at like the highest resolution with no frame rate drops or very minimal stuttering. And I'm sitting here, I'm like, I have a desktop that is pushing 8 years or if not longer old, and it will have certain games that it's not designed for that, because this was not what it was intended to. This was back when it was like, to give you context, this is when Overwatch 1 was probably around, like first coming out. That was like the big thing it could run. And then certain games that just get increasingly more and more over time, like when it comes to like what they have to all do, like League of Legends or Overwatch or Warframe, or all these games I personally played for the longest time, they can bog your computer down even. Like I recently found out I cannot have multiple things going on in my computer while I play Marvel Rivals. Like I cannot let it go and just be like, oh, I'm listening to a YouTube video in the back while I'm playing Marvel Rivals. No, Rivals has a fit and then it shuts itself down because of like memory issues. And I'm like, I was not expecting that. Like I've never had that problem with a game before. So it's so weird seeing it in this aspect of it. The bar of entry is still pretty high from the monetary standpoint, but the accessibility of it with like, you can get some really good stuff is much lower than ever, I feel like. And it really comes down to like, what are you willing to put into it? You know what I mean?
Yeah. The barriers to entry are money. Do you know how to make it? Like, can you build the thing? If you don't know how to make it, do you know someone who can build it? Or are you fine with a pre-built machine? But yeah, the accessibility to the point on like those pre-built machines, they're really, really easy to find. And they can be cheap if all you want is to have a productivity machine. If you're just like, if you're just like my dad and you're just going to do some emails and answer some Word or write some Word documents on it, you can spend $300 or less and be perfectly fine.
And even some cases, it's like, even doing like, say if it's just that bare minimum, even a laptop or even like a tablet or something could maybe be good enough. Technology, as it's gotten better over the years, becomes more impressive when it's, oh, I have this, and this, but then all of a sudden all this stuff's going on. But
right.
All right, we should probably wrap this up as soon as we can. How many more points we got?
Well, I already touched on sometimes PC version isn't the best version.
Yep.
Oftentimes, like I said, the PC game, though, will be the superior version. Not everyone has that hardware, so sure, you might be able to get the PC version, and it should be the best version, but if you have a mediocre computer, well, what's the point at that point, And then the last point I think to consider, some games are just artificially, wow, I have some enunciation troubles. Some games are artificially better on PC because they're just designed with that in mind. Or they're historically like PC-style games. I'm looking at your point-and-click adventures. Sure, you can play that on a console with an analog stick, but, it was made to be done with this thing called a mouse. So if you can play it on the thing with the mouse, why wouldn't you play it with the PC with the mouse? Or similarly, for first-person shooters. People have played them on console for, we're going to be touching on 20 years now with GoldenEye, and I guess a little bit longer if you think about Doom on the Super Nintendo. But people are just so used to playing them on a keyboard and a mouse similarly provides you more like freedom of moving your cursor for aiming, right? So they're just kind of designed with PC in mind. So it becomes like, well, is it really a choice then if you do you want to even consider playing it on console?
Mm-hmm.
But that's all I had for this. So I feel like we had a pretty good lively discussion here on this subject. I know you were excited about it going into it.
Yeah, it's specific to me, I feel like, partially because as someone who has stints of going through basically the same consoles for like a long period of time, but owning multiple kinds of hardware and a PC, I have a very unique ability to see kind of the pros and cons across the board. And like this is something I'm very passionate about when it comes to gaming. It's that I believe personally that there are video games for everyone. So finding ways to be able to accessibly let people enjoy them or like get them to even have a chance to enjoy them is important. And I think that's what's really good about having so many different platforms that people can do. Because like we said, it's like there's plenty of games that are on multiple platforms that allow people to pick something up and they're able to like actually get a chance to play it regardless of the version. Or some people might be more inclined to play a certain type of game that maybe is very popular on a specific piece of hardware. If someone is like a big cozy game person, Stardew Valley, sort of thing like that, I would almost suggest that they do the Switch just because there's so many other cozy games for them to get into. So it's not just Stardew Valley. It's, Animal Crossing, it's Potion Permit, it's all these other games that exist that are on the system. And yeah, you can maybe get them on another system, except for maybe Animal Crossing. But like, you have a very distinct market for certain consoles, I think, too. Like, FPS players love Xbox and PlayStation and PC. But like, I feel like cozy gamers can kind of go about anything. I think just Nintendo is the better choice for them personally.
Right.
And like sports games, like you can play them on just about everything, but I would still say that you'd probably want them on harder hardware, like, or not harder hardware. Wow. Modern hardware, more like in the sense of, Sony and Microsoft. But it's not saying like, if you don't care about your graphics as much, you can play the show on a Switch, like MLB The Show on the Switch. So I think at the end of the day, it's like, if you are wanting to get into gaming, or if you are in gaming and really want to like kind of figure out what you want to do specifically with it, really think about the type of games that you want to play. Like for me, I am in a very big single player kick right now. I love a lot of the stories that I'm enjoying right now. And I don't think that's inherently bad because it's like I get to kind of enjoy a multitude of games across a bunch of different consoles because otherwise I wouldn't be able to.
Yeah, you just got to find them where they are. And sometimes it's not on what you have. So, yeah, at the end of the day, I think people got to go with what they want to go with. If they're fine spending the amount of money to have all the hardware, Godspeed. Go for it. That's your choice. You get to do what you want with your money. But I also think it's worth looking at, like, there's a reason I, like, could put them in here, and, like, the green and the red, the pros and the cons. Like, there's good reasons to think about, like, well, what about the other one? And I think that's something that's important. I don't like just, I tend to know what I want to go with. And when, but even then, I think it's still worth at least doing the mental exercise for sure of looking at what if I wanted to do the alternative. And similarly, like when people present to me like, well, here's what I think I want to go with, I get into this habit of trying to present to them like, well, what if you went with this alternative and see what they think? Even if I agree with them, like, it's still just worth going through and thinking about, well, does that make sense for you? And if their initial decision is what they want, that's what they do. If they can be persuaded, then, you look at what the other options entail. But yeah, good talk today. I think we've done pretty well. As for listeners, though, I hope they've enjoyed it, and I hope they've enjoyed it so much that they might want to give some form of engagement here. If you thought we had a very productive discussion, thumbs up the episode. Give it a like. If you have something you want to add in There are places to comment whatever you're listening on. If you're on YouTube, of course, the comment section is right below. Other platforms have it in different places. It's hard to know where they all are encyclopedically. Or you might feel so inclined to send us a voice message. There's that enunciation coming up again at speakpipe.com/endless conversation loop, and we will most definitely answer it on the show, whatever your question comment is, at a later time. But unless you have anything else to add, I think we're ready to sign out.
I actually do have something. I'm going to kind of go a little bit off the cuff here, but I had an idea, and this is the first time Brandon is hearing it, so sorry in advance. So we're 35 episodes in. Well, you're 35 episodes in. I've been here for maybe a sixth of that. But what I have actually been considering is, when we're getting closer and closer to certain milestones, we'll say. And I was thinking that once we hit episode 45 to 50, somewhere in there, I haven't figured out exactly where, but I thought it'd be cool to maybe start looking at some people who had suggestions, and maybe we touch on those topics, maybe rehash some old ones that we've discussed, or even ones maybe you went into that I wasn't a part of early. But I thought it wouldn't be a bad option to kind of like let our community decide what we want to talk about for an episode or two. Let us kind of know what you think that we should talk about, or if there's something that you really want to get our opinion on for whatever reason. It could be specifically on a game, could be specifically on like a type of genre, the industry itself, but yes, give us suggestions. We're very open, and like there are plenty of topics that we haven't even thought of talking about yet, mostly because it hasn't come up in our ideas. So yeah, if you guys want to hear something specific, I encourage you heavily to put out suggestions, and then probably closer to when we get to like episode 50 of this, I say we should look into maybe taking some of those suggestions to heart and kind of putting our brains together on like, what do we think of this?
I agree. That would be a good milestone type thing to go over. Episode 50 for sure. It's really all going to come down to, do we get those comments? Because I do regret to say on episode like 34, the YouTube version has 12 views currently, 0 comments. So, we can only do so much, right?
Well, you can't rush. We put in the work for what we do, and I understand. Maybe we're not everyone's cup of tea. That's okay. But like, I think it's more important that if you want to have an actual conversation about something, there are a lot of things in this industry that do need to be talked about. Like, we can't cover everything in like an hour and a half, 2 hours, or whatever it might be. So just giving us that chance to at least put our 2 cents out, and even taking the time out to listen to us, is a huge thing. And I thank everybody who's watched us up until this point, even if it's only been the 12 or whatever. Like, I recently, I was watching something where they were pointing out like, I've only got like 10 viewers on Twitch or something, and they pointed out that it's like, that's like a decent sized room of people that all have your attention. So it may be small, yes, and I'm not expecting this to have like insane numbers anytime soon, if at all. But I do appreciate the audience that it is slowly but surely finding, and hopefully we can kind of grow that community a little bit more and be able to just have that time together to all share the common thing we all enjoy, which is video games.
Indeed. Well, I think that's a fine note to end on, so shall we sign out here?
I think we shall.
All right, this is Brandon.
This is Boom.
And we will catch you in episode 36. Thank you for listening, everyone. It'll be the big Switch 2 presentation discussion. Woo!
Oh, yeah, that's going to be a very lengthy discussion, I feel like.
All right. Would you like to do your sign out? Or did you say it and I totally missed it?
I don't know if I have a sign out yet. It's just...
Well, anyway.
Bye, everyone.
Yep. Goodbye. Thanks for listening.